Danny Shirey, we are back for another episode. There we go. All right. Where's Zachary Smith when you need him? Danny, we are back for another episode. We missed a week, but really it was just preseason hockey and training camp hockey. There really wasn't a whole lot to talk about. We teased some goalie talk, so we will get into that. But just off the rip, how you been for 2 weeks, man? Like, haven't seen you. It's been a while.
I've been doing well. I missed your ugly mug, man.
Yeah, you're probably one of the only people that did.
Yeah, well, I can deal with it in small doses, but not a whole lot more than that.
I mean, baseball season's over, so I got less photography work going on, and you think you got your dog squared away and all the family stuff that was going on there. So let's talk some Penguins hockey. The next time you and I get together, we will have a regular season game to talk about. A regular season game against the Chicago Blackhawks and Connor Bedard, which I am looking forward to. I cannot wait to see this kid in regular season hockey.
Yeah, I mean, there aren't a ton of stakes involved in that game, but the storylines there. It's Erik Karlsson's first regular season game as a Penguin, let alone at PPG Paints Arena. First game of the Kyle Dubas era, and then you've got a new generational talent
who is looking the part in the little bit of hockey that he's played. And it's preseason, and it's the rookie or the development tournament and all that kind of stuff. We haven't really seen anything real, but he looks good, man.
It's funny. So many people complain that the NHL does an awful job marketing the game, marketing its stars and top players. Yet I've seen an overwhelming negative sentiment from people who are like, I can't believe the coverage this kid's getting, and like he hasn't even played a game and whatever. It's like, this is exactly what should be happening. You've got a kid coming in who you look at and I get he hasn't played a game. There's a lot of things that could happen here, but you've got a kid who's in the McDavid, the Crosby conversation as far as prospect talent is concerned. And when you have that, you need to take every advantage of it to try and grow your game and at least get some more eyeballs. Like, I didn't go out of my way watching Blackhawks games last year.
No, but I will this year.
Yeah, exactly. So it's been very bizarre to me it's literally the same people who are like, the NHL can't market itself that are now babbling and complaining that Bedard's getting too much coverage.
Yeah, and one more thing about the Blackhawks, I think they were really smart because they don't want to compete this year. They're in the middle of a rebuild. They want to try to get another high draft pick, but they were very smart to get some guys like Taylor Hall and Corey Perry who are older and definitely not in their prime anymore, but have the mental, like the hockey IQ and still some skill set left to play with a player like Connor Bedard. We've already seen it in some of these, preseason games and practices. I know the Blackhawks put a video up last week of a pass that, Bedard made to Taylor Hall where, it was that sauce, passed two lines and dropped it right on Taylor Hall's stick. So they're going to be fun together and they're going to be must-watch hockey. So that's, it's exciting to see something worth watching in the NHL that isn't the same. And not that I don't like McDavid or Crosby or Ovechkin, but something new, something fresh.
Well, it's kind of interesting too, because you look back at, not that we haven't had some really good draft classes in recent years, but you look at like the first overall picks, even a guy like Jack Hughes, who is a surefire superstar right now. He wasn't right away.
And he wasn't this level either.
Right.
Yeah. So, and there's a good crop of young players in the NHL this year that I think, that the race for the Calder Trophy this year is going to be a lot of fun to watch. There's some good rookies, a lot of new faces in the NHL that I think people are going to find are very exciting. Speaking of new faces, like that setup. The Penguins have two new goalies in the system after trading Casey DeSmith in the Erik Karlsson trade. Magnus Hellberg and Alex Nedeljkovic, who I will always ruin his name. I'm just going to throw it out there now. I'm not worried about ruining his name because I know I'm never going to get it right. But the last time we spoke, we were talking about which one of the, it'll probably be Nedeljkovic, but who of those two can the Penguins depend on? Well, now through preseason and training camp, it's a pretty clear answer that it's Nedeljkovic. What can the Penguins expect from their second and third goalie? We know what to expect from Shirey. He's been here for 5 years now. We know what he brings to the table. What about that backup goalie spot and that third goalie spot? And when Shirey goes down, can they run the show for a period of time?
My answer to the last part is no.
Okay.
Specifically not Magnus Hellberg. Like I pretty much view him as a number 3 that maybe you can bring him up and he can make a spot start here or there if absolutely necessary.
Beautiful goalie setup though. His pads are incredible.
Yeah, all the Penguins, we haven't talked about really anything. Well, we haven't done a podcast since training camp started. Obviously, one of the things, it was actually Shirey who let this out, but apparently Dubas and the front office mandated that all the goaltenders have white pads. And
how do you feel about that?
When was it? Like the early 2010s or maybe the late 2000s when goalies really started shifting away, because like Fleury used to have those bright yellow pads, and then before they won the cup, he ended up going to those pretty much all white pads, and that was pretty prevalent around the league. Like most goalies were going with the white pads, and a lot of them were just straight up all white pads. There wasn't even like an accent of the team's color on there or anything. I don't know. It maybe took 7 or 8 years, and then I think the novelty of it wore off because I don't know that there actually is a quantifiable effect.
Yeah, I can't see there being a quantifiable. I think it's the same thing with stick tape. Like there's certain guys that like, if I use black stick tape, the goalie can't see the puck right away. They're professionals, man. Like, come on. I think it's a mental thing.
Yeah, so we saw, a bit of a transition there where goalies started to go back to the colored pads, and even last year, like Shirey had an all black. I thought those they were so
good looking. Yeah.
Anyway, so maybe there is some information or data points that we just don't have access to that shows that. I mean, I can't imagine Dubas and his front office mandating that for absolutely no reason. Like, I don't think that that's baseless. I just, from my personal experience playing, coaching, and I don't even know how you'd go about getting reliable data on that either.
Expected goals versus black pads versus expected goals versus white pads. Like, there's your new project for this season.
That's over my head. I'm out on that. Anyway, going back to
goalies, actual goalie play.
Back to actual goalie talk. Hellberg is not a guy that I really foresee even ever challenging for that backup spot. Even if Nedeljkovic ends up performing poorly as Shirey's backup, I really don't see Hellberg, based off his previous body of work, being somebody that you really want playing more than 6 or 7 games, and that's tops. That's
right.
If he's playing 6 or 7 games this year, there's probably an issue. So that basically brings us to Nedeljkovic. Where is he at right now? That's a really tough question to answer. When he was with Carolina, specifically talking about the 2020 COVID season, the shortened season, he was one of the best goalies in the league that year. Put up some very, very solid numbers. Had I don't know,
above 900 save percentage.
Oh yeah,
it was
significantly. I don't know the numbers off the top of my hand, but like his save percentage was really strong. Goals saved above expected. I know he was toward the top net minders in the league. But again, you look at that, and because it was a shortened season, the sample on that isn't all that significant, right? We've seen all kinds of different goalies, and maybe this is kind of backtracking on what I just said about Hellberg, because the goaltending position just in and of itself is extremely volatile. You see performance go up and down all the time, even from the top guys. Like if you look at one thing I really love, J Fresh Hockey on Twitter, every year, or sometimes even multiple points throughout the year, he'll do these fan polls, having fans rank like the top forwards in the league, the top defensemen, the top goalies. The goalie one specifically is hilarious to look at because it changes so much. The perception of it, but the perception's based off results.
Yep.
So anyway, if you exclude the COVID season for Nedeljkovic, well, if you just throw that out, and I didn't say the
West
the
Mifflin,
S word.
Pitt. It just did the all three for me this week. Just nope. Hockey.
But if you're throwing that sample out, and I'm not saying that that's what you should do, that should be absolutely contextualized in this conversation. But there's just not a whole lot that inspires confidence that there's a guy here that's like, oh, if Shirey starts stumbling or if this injury flares up or something else happens and you need Nedeljkovic for a 20-game stretch where he's the guy, outside of that COVID season, I really don't see anything that makes me confident in him. Now, that's not me saying that he's destined to fail. And quite frankly, he's performed very well during training camp, and even his cameos during the preseason when he got in there, he performed really well.
Here's my take on this. First of all, if you go around the league, how many hockey teams are built to survive an injury from losing their starting goalie for a long period of time? Look at what's going on in Tampa right now with with the back injury, and Vasilevsky's going to be out for what they're saying 2 months at best.
It's going to be a significant.
It's going to be a significant amount of time, and the surgery that he had, it's not I would say let's be cautious and pump the brakes on if he's going to come back at 100% right away too, because it's just that's the nature of a back injury, and they have nothing behind him. I mean, like less than what the Penguins have right now.
Well, I mean, Brian Elliott was his backup last year, so that kind of tells you the state of their goaltending depth.
So that's number one. Number two for me is look at who, and I've brought this up in the past, but playing with the Red Wings, there's not a lot there to shield him or protect him. So I think that has to be taken into context as well. And then finally, with the NHL, the way it's going, scoring is up everywhere. Like we're seeing, scoring numbers, goal numbers, point totals from players, average goals per game are just up. I just think that we need to start shifting how we look at the goalie position as a whole in the NHL.
I was beating that drum all of last year when everyone was ready to run Casey DeSmith out of town, and I kept telling everybody, I'm like, look, he's not a guy that is pushing for a number one job either here or elsewhere. He's not someone that you want to rely or depend on in any meaningful circumstance. But if you stack him up, especially compared to his cap hit, like his cap hit is super insignificant, and I obviously I realize he's gone now. But if you looked at what he was making and looked at his just save percentage, goals saved above expected, whether it was last season or the 3 or 4 year sample prior to that, DeSmith had an argument as one of the best backups in the league, right? But to your point, I think we need to kind of change the way we view that just in a general sense, because I'm not going to sit here and pretend that all Penguins fans are also watching the rest of the league and have knowledge and insights as to what a backup goaltender really is. But there were a lot of backup goaltenders last year that had sub 900 save percentage. In fact, there were a few starters. There were a few starters that had sub 900 save percentages as well. I'm not some DeSmith lover, but when he was dealt away in the Carlson trade, I was like, that's really interesting. Penguins fans might be on tap to get a taste of what it's like to have, I don't want to say like a true or legitimate backup, but they did have it good with DeSmith as their backup. You can't I know everyone's like, oh, well, you can't rely on him. In one game he makes 40 saves, and then the next he gives up 5. Well, that's the goaltending position, and that's the backup goaltending position. He's a backup. That's what you got. So again, I'm not trying to be super pessimistic on Nedeljkovic, because that COVID season, if he can find that form again, well, all of a sudden, great. You do have a guy that you don't need to worry about overworking Shirey at all. But on the other side of that, there's a decent chance, based off of what he did in Detroit the past couple seasons, and even before that COVID season with Carolina, that he's just going to be another run-of-the-mill backup NHL goalie.
Speaking of backups, fringe guys, all this kind of stuff with the goalies, there are other positions that need to be filled. There's other guys that the Penguins are looking at to fill third and fourth line spots. And, you know, we've talked about it a little bit in other episodes that, you know, they have some issues that they need to figure out, especially with the forwards. I think the defense is, for the most part, we know what it's going to look like, but the forward group, there's some wiggle room there. And you wrote about one of them. I've noticed him a little in the little bit that I've watched of practices and stuff, you know, in games. Radim Zohorna's come back, and I don't even think it's just one of those he's comfortable with the Penguins, because if you remember, Kyle Dubas signed him onto the Toronto Maple Leafs too. So this isn't someone that's just comfortable, or that the organization's comfortable with. This is someone that Kyle Dubas has now signed to his team twice. What is it that Kyle Dubas sees, and what have you seen from Radim Zohorna that is, you know, gives us some hope for him making this lineup and actually having an impact?
You know, when I initially saw that the Penguins had signed Zohorna this offseason, I was like, oh, okay, like, it's nice that he's back, but I kind of just, he was an afterthought as far as being in the mix with the NHL guys. Right. Not necessarily because of how I felt about him as a player, but just knowing that, you know, they signed a lot of bottom six guys, and there were other fringe guys that we'll touch on here in a few minutes that were kind of pushing for roster spots ahead of him. But then I watched the first preseason game that he played against Columbus, and I immediately was like, oh my God, I forgot how much I love watching this guy play. And he's a very interesting case because he's got such a unique skill set. Like he's 6'6", 220. You don't see a lot of NHL forwards that are...
But he doesn't play like a 6'6", 220 guy at all.
He does not at all. And that's what makes him so interesting. So I did a film room on him, I think it was last week. Yeah. Based on what I was seeing from him through his first couple preseason games. And then I kind of touched on some of the stuff that he did in his first stint with the Penguins. This guy is a legitimate machine on the forecheck. I am not exaggerating when I say every single time he hops over the boards, he is wreaking havoc on the forecheck. And now that doesn't necessarily mean that every single shift he's going out there and stealing the puck behind the goal line and setting a guy up in the slot for a goal.
There's a reason why he's fighting for a roster spot.
Right. With that being said, even if he's not doing those things, he's making it more difficult on the opposition to break out. Now, that might mean extending the Penguins' zone time and getting back on the forecheck and regaining possession and then setting up chances. But there's also a flow that goes into the sequencing of transitioning the puck and getting to the offensive zone. And he does such a great job at disrupting that because he thinks the game really well. He sees the ice. I would say at an NHL level. On top of that, you combine his long stride where he can basically cover half the width of the ice in 3 strides. And then he's got his long reach on top of that. He's able to get in and out of so many lanes basically in an instant that a lot of these opposing breakouts just don't know how to handle and navigate him.
And you talked about sequencing and him pushing the issue with the forecheck and everything. One of the things I like about that is when you're looking at third and fourth line guys, you're not expecting them to be 20 goal scorers in the NHL. That's just not what you want from a third and fourth line player. But what you do want to see from a third and fourth line player is disrupt the other team, make it difficult for them to get any kind of momentum, make it difficult for them to transition, make it hard for them to get the puck into the defensive, their offensive zone, our defensive zone. And you want to see him, make life hard for the other team so that when your big guys come on, when your top 6 comes on, you're the team with the momentum. You're the team that is, getting yourself ready to make a, an outlet or, to make a rush down ice. And I think that if Radim Zohorna is going to bring that to the table, I think that's another thing that the Penguins sorely lost or missed last season.
Yeah, no doubt. And even just taking it a step further, because like I don't want to make it seem as if I'm like, this is an intriguing player because he can disrupt a forecheck. There's a lot of guys that can disrupt a forecheck. Yeah. Maybe not in the manner that he's doing it, but they're out there. You can find good forecheckers. What makes him so interesting on top of that forechecking ability is that even though he's got all that size and you would think he's a muck it up, dump and chase type player, he's got a little bit of skill, and he is 1,000%. God, a guy who I would consider to be a possession player rather than like a dump and chase gritty kind of player. And there's so many instances of this guy retrieving a puck off the wall in the defensive zone and immediately getting off the wall and taking the available ice in the middle. And then he picks, obviously he picked his head up in advance of that to identify the open ice and to get there. But then once he's in the middle of the ice, he's not necessarily looking to get the puck off his stick in a hurry. And he's definitely not like, oh, there's a defender in front of me, I better dump this puck. He has been outstanding at not only getting off the wall into the middle, but then transitioning the puck all by himself and even crossing the offensive blue line with possession. Now, while he does have a little bit of skill, it is tough for some of those big guys because just from the nature of having a super long stick, you can kind of handcuff yourself a little bit when you're trying to stick handle and deal with the puck when it's in and around your skates. And sometimes he ends up losing the puck because of that. And I've seen some people suggest like, oh, this dude, like he can't make plays or whatever. Like that's going to happen with this kind of guy, but that's the kind of risk that you take on for the high reward that he brings, because like he legitimately is a unicorn in the sense that there's no other 6'6", 220 player in the league who forechecks the way he does. And also just like, I don't even want to say he's necessarily a major, I'm not doing good with my verbiage here, but it's so unique to have a guy like that who can literally carry the puck across both blue lines and do that. And on top of that, he's flashed some finishing ability at the NHL level in his first stint with the Penguins as well.
With the first stint with the Penguins, I remember there were a few goals there where it was like, where did that, like, how does a guy his size have that kind of skill? How is he skating through the other team's defense like that? I'm excited that he's back. I always did like him, and I was kind of upset to see him go. I mean, I understand why, but I just think that he brings something to the table that the Penguins haven't had in a year or two, and it's good to see that back. One more thing on him, and this is more of a speculation question. A couple weeks ago, we talked about what the second power play would look like. Do you see any scenario where he may be that guy to fill out the second power play? Or do you think that's not really his game? That's not what they brought him in for?
No, I don't know that I really see him on the power play. One, because of some of the personnel that they already have there. Like, they're not going to trot him out there in place of Jeff Carter because he's not a very good face-off guy.
Okay.
And he's not really even though he is he's got a lot of size, he's not like a traditional net front guy that's, a tower to move and is hopping on every. Now that reach does help him in those tight areas where he can snag loose pucks quickly, but I wouldn't necessarily say
it's not his strength.
It's not one of the strengths of his game. So, maybe if they would want to try to lean into his shooting ability a little bit, I could see him on that second unit. But then again, you've still got Brian Rust and Riley Smith out there, and I would definitely
much better shots than
I would definitely think that those guys are going to be looked at as the trigger men before Zohorna.
So still looking like Jeff Carter on the second power play.
I've been telling you guys nonstop that Jeff Carter is not going to come out of the lineup this year. And we actually have seen it when the Penguins played in Halifax earlier this week, and basically had their full complement of NHL guys, save for Jake Gensel because he's still out with injury. Although, by the way, it's kind of starting to track.
He took some contact. I mean, light contact, but he took some contact.
Yeah, he's practicing in a.
Yeah.
I think they even said he was at full capacity here. Now, granted, that doesn't mean that he's ready to go.
No, he needs to go through some conditioning and probably take another week or two at least before he's ready to. I would say take on a full workload, but it's good to see him trending in the right direction.
Yeah, no doubt.
And we do forget. I mean, like we just talked about at the beginning of the episode, but we're 6 days away from the season opener, and they said he'd be a few weeks. So, I mean, we are in that timetable where if he is a little ahead of schedule, he's going to be, ready soon.
Right.
Which is good to see. It's going to be a much needed addition to this lineup.
Yeah. And I promise everybody I will go back to Jeff Carter in a second, but I was telling, I wrote this, I believe it was when training camp opened. Maybe not. I write too much. I lose track of what I said.
Nerd.
Anyway, yeah, that I am a giant nerd. I will take that on.
Stats and writing.
God, no, I don't even remember. What was I going to? Oh, I was going to say, so I've seen some comments, and this wasn't necessarily recently, but it was like, oh, Gensel, he'll miss 5 or 7 games. That's not the end of the world. Well, I'm of the opinion, as are many people, that the Penguins are closer to a fringe postseason team than they are a Stanley Cup contender. So I don't know how you can say that like a 5 or 7 game stretch doesn't really matter.
I've had that conversation with my pops, and he brought up a really good point with their age. This is not going to be one of those teams that can go on a run late in the season because they're all older. I don't see them building steam in March and April. I see them needing to bank points in October, November, so that when the end of the season comes, they can maybe get a little rest in and have a spot wrapped up. So those 5 or 7 games at the beginning of the season may not be a big deal, but I think for this hockey team, they're an extremely big deal.
Yeah, you hear it from Sullivan and the players all the time. It's not even a Penguins specific thing. You hear it from all hockey players. It's like the points in October matter the same as they do in March and April, but that I don't know that there's a full like acceptance of that. It's like, oh, like they had a bad start to the season. There's time. But if you go back to the 21-22 season, there were a lot of people that were seriously concerned about the Penguins at the time because of the way they performed in the second half. Yeah. That was probably a product of the average age of their team and having a lot of older guys. Yeah. Well, we're 2 years later now. That's probably not going to change a whole lot. Right. So everybody was like, oh, it's, Gensel, well, they'll miss him, but it's not the end of the world. It's like, well, they don't have a ton of,
Right.
They don't have Danton Heinen ready to step up and hopefully score like 4 goals in those 6 games and then score 10 times the rest of the year. They don't really have that guy in waiting. Anyway,
I'm going to save you from the Carter talk. How about that? I'm going to throw you a lifeline because I know you're not a big fan of talking about Jeff Carter.
It was just a quick thing. So
all right, I'll let you. All right,
I'll touch on it. So Penguins played in Halifax earlier this week. They had their entire NHL roster and lineup playing.
The Halifax and Nova Scotia games were pretty cool.
It was really cool. And honestly, I thought it was really cool to see how much the team and the players just embraced being there for Crosby. I thought that was really cool. Anyway, my Carter point, second power play comes out. You know who was centering it. It was Jeff Carter.
Yeah.
I will say there was a comment from Mike Sullivan, and I wasn't necessarily expecting otherwise, but Sullivan was asked about Carter during camp and how he's been looking. And of course, Sullivan was like, oh, he came to camp in good shape, which is what you hear about everybody who's coming off a bad year. I was not encouraged at all by what I've seen from him throughout the preseason so far. And I went in super, super optimistic that if he could even be just an inch or a hair above what he was last year. But I went into the preseason games looking for anything that he's still doing this okay, or this got a little better, and it just didn't. It's bad. It's bad.
I hear that lifeline behind us. We do record at a studio, Little Giant Studio, and we're running a little over our time slot, and there is a band behind us getting ready to practice, it sounds like. So I'm going to wrap this one up now so that they can do their thing and I don't have to edit all that audio.
Sounds good to me. And we can.
We'll just end it there. Like and subscribe. Check us out on all the other, on Facebook, YouTube. No, we're not on Facebook. Why'd I say Facebook? Just check us out online.
The social media,
on the websites,
find us.
on the internets, all that fun stuff. Follow his Substack. For Danny Shirey, I'm Eddie Provident. We'll see you next week talking about regular season hockey.